hopefully you won't be able to hear any of that because this is a pretty decent microphone. If that's not the case, then I'll probably start over and you'll never know. But if you hear a little bit of extraneous noise in the background, that's what it's from. Today we're going to talk about some specific principles from the Protestant tradition of biblical interpretation. Now, the reason why we're doing this is twofold. Number one, we come from a Protestant tradition. So in the 15th century, you have Martin Luther separating from the Catholic Church, 14th, 15th, right around there. He separates from the Catholic Church. He was a monk, friar, and then he left, and he didn't really start the Lutheran Church. What he did is he protested against the Catholic Church at the time, and then what came of it became what's called the Lutheran tradition, but that's really the Protestant Reformation, which means that as Seventh-day Adventists, we are from that particular tradition. So if we were from the Catholic tradition, we would remain Catholic. I know a lot of you come from there. And every once in a while, you'll hear someone say, the delineation Catholic and Christian. Just to be clear, Catholics are Christians. In fact, that tradition was the first tradition, and the term Catholic just means universal. So until, first of all, there was the Great Schism in about 500 or so, around that area, where the Orthodox churches left. So Russian Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, those Church Coptic, those churches all left. Ethiopian Orthodox. But then you have the Protestant Reformation that happened at kind of the end of the Middle Ages, if you will, and we come from that particular tradition. And there's a different set of biblical interpretations. And I want to be clear on something. We all interpret everything. Have you ever gotten a text message from someone that was in all caps and you couldn't understand why they were screaming at you? And they may not have known that screaming was a thing when it comes to all caps, probably your grandparents or your parents at times. We all interpret what we read differently. And in fact, we can even break this down to a very simple sign, right? Have you ever seen a stop sign? I mean, of course you've seen a stop sign. So when you look at a stop sign, what does it mean? And you're probably saying to yourself, stop. No, that's true. Except that depending on your context, depending on your situation, you may interpret that significantly different. For instance, if you come to an intersection at 3 p.m. and there's cars all around and there's a police officer on the other side of the road and it says stop, what are you going to do? You're going to stop. You're going to look. You may even let somebody go. You may even be extra compassionate that day. But if you roll up to that same sign and that same intersection at 3 a.m. when there's no one around, are you really going to treat it the same way? No, you're going to interpret that same sign. It's exactly the same, right? But you're going to interpret it significantly differently because the context makes a difference. And so that's the reason why we've got this Bible, and it's easy to say, well, how come everyone doesn't just believe the same thing? They're all reading the same words. Well, first of all, no, we're not. If we're reading it in different languages, we're going through those translations. Even in English, if you're reading it in English, you're going through those translations. Even if you're reading it in Greek, let's say you're an incredible Greek scholar, and we may have some of those in the class, and you can read it in Greek, you're still going to interpret that language a particular way because every language, all knowledge is interpreted knowledge. If you've ever heard the metaphor of the 3 blind men and the elephant, 3 blind men walk into a room where there's an elephant, and one walks over and grabs the leg and says, oh, I know what an elephant is. An elephant is like a tree. It's like the trunk of a tree. And then the other one walks into the side of the elephant and he goes, no. An elephant is like a wall. It's big and it's straight and it's like a wall. And then the third one walks and the elephant kind of plays with it, with its snout, with its trunk. And the man goes, no. An elephant is not like a tree. It's not like a wall. An elephant is like a snake. Now, they're all right and they're all wrong. And this has to do with how they interpret what they are seeing. So we've got words in Scripture that we've got to interpret. We've got phrases we've got to interpret. And they come from the Greek. They don't come from English. And so we have to translate. We have to translate those things in order. Sorry, I got a phone call right in the middle of that. We have to translate those things in a very particular way in order for us to be able to understand. And this is why net.bible.org is so great, because it really delves into the idea of the language and what each word means. And so we're going to look at 4 different specific Protestant principles of biblical interpretation. Then we're going to break out those a little bit from each other. So let's take a look at the first one. The first one is the principle of the study of words, and there's a bunch underneath here. So first of all, they may be studied etymologically. This study shows us how words are constructed. So we're going to take a word like luo in Greek, which means loose, right? And what we understand is that when we do the contraction of that vowel, you can loose, you will loose, you might loose, you have loosed, but you won't loose anymore. And I know it's a weird word to use, but there's all these different versions that we can use according to the contraction of the verbs, not the vowels, sorry, the verbs. When we do that, every single time we do that, it means something different. For instance, have you ever heard of the pluperfect? The pluperfect is essentially like I was doing it and I'm not doing it now, but I will be doing it again. There's some crazy stuff in language, and those of you, and I think we talked about this last week, those of you who come from families that don't speak English as your first language, you know there are certain words that just are uninterpretable, right? They're untranslatable. So you get a close approximation and try and figure out what it is. Well, that's what we've done in Scripture at times as well, even on the English. That's why you've got certain Bibles that sound a little bit different, that use different words. It's because there are some particular interpretations of certain words, and then scholars make those choices along the line. That's why I like net.bible.org, because it gives you a lot of that information in those footnotes. But the first way we may study is etymologically. That means we're studying the words, and we're even breaking the words into pieces if we need to. The second way is that we can study it comparatively. So, for instance, let's say you get the word kai, which transliterated, meaning if I'm using English letters rather than the Greek letters, it's K-A-I. It means and, but it also sometimes means then, and then sometimes it means therefore, and then sometimes it means with even. So you can translate this word a lot of different ways. So you begin to look at how that word shows up in certain sentence structures all throughout Scripture. So you can begin to do a comparative study on what that meaning of that word is. I mean, for instance, let's take the word cool, right? In 1940, the word meant it was cool. Things were cool. They were cold, right? It was a temperature setting, if you will. And then we have later on in the 60s, it becomes cool. Like, that's cool, right? That's cool. And it means something different. And in the 80s, it means something different. Now, 30 years later, it means something different. I hope it's only 30 years. 30, 40 years later, it means something different again. And so what we're seeing is how you use these words comparatively, and you put a bunch of them together and you begin to understand how you use this word in certain constructions. And that's why, again, you'll go to different translations of Scripture, like the New International Version or the New Living Translation, and they'll use different words, even though the Greek has the same words, but we're interpreting those words differently. So that's another way that we can do it. So we can do it etymologically, or we can do it comparatively. Then you may study them historically, right? This notes the historical or cultural reference, and such information enriches our understanding of the word. Remember, right now we're just studying words. We're not even studying verses, just words. So how is this word used? How is it used in historical writing? How is it used in political writing? How is it used in writing about sports? They even had that. So understanding where the words come from and their particular historical context makes a difference. In fact, one time I read, and it was because I didn't have any friends in college, but I was reading the Odyssey